My name is Chris Rakes. I'll be moderating this session. Our first speaker today is going to be Paul Weisko, presenting the People's Liberation Army Navy, Can It Defeat the U.S. Navy? Under the faculty advisor, Professor Devin Haggerty.
Hi, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today. My research question is also the title of the presentation, and that is, can the People's Liberation Army Navy defeat the U.S. Navy? Okay, so my hypothesis is that the Chinese Navy could beat the United States Navy in a war held in the Chinese coastal waters if the battle was held today. Due to time constraints and a very long research methods section, I'm going to have to go straight. I'm going to have to really give some stuff lesser notice than should get. But first, I'd like to start out with the general impression of the People's Liberation Army Navy, otherwise known as the PLA-N. Its strategy is very similar in concept to the other parts of the People's Liberation Army Navy, the People's Liberation Army, and basically that is high losses, but you get the job done. It's also different from the United States Navy in the way that the PLA-N's emphasis is on large number of ships, as opposed to smaller numbers of ships, as demonstrated by the massive amounts of ships that are dedicated to one or two missions, and are smaller, whereas the ships that the U.S. Navy has are dedicated to pretty much every single mission thinkable, and then have smaller numbers of ships. Also, the surface missile inventory of the PLA-N, that is excellent. The PLA-N has a missile that is actually able to have a 95% hit rate. However, the thing is that the U.S. Navy radars actually go to the surface of the ocean, so they basically be able to intercept the YJ-82s. Also, the anti-submarine warfare and the air defense capabilities are lacking, and this is demonstrated by the fact that the Chinese still use mid-level sonar, which is totally obsolete in all their anti-submarine warfare. However, given the large number of ships, the PLA-N can afford heavy casualties and still blind the enemy, which hence is similar to other areas of the PLA. Also, the PLA-N is known for developing very high quality and modern asymmetrical warfare weapons, such as anti-ship ballistic missiles, and also very silent submarines, as well as some good mines. The PLA-N is also rapidly improving and faster than anybody would have expected, as demonstrated by the fact that you had Chinese naval pilots landing on the carrier like years before the Western experts said they would be able to do that. Also, then the PLA-N is designed for just burst attack, something I'll go into later. The general impression of the United States Navy is that it is has very heavy emphasis on carriers, as demonstrated by the fact that it has more carriers in the world than any other navy. It also relies on economy of scale, as demonstrated by the fact that they have very large ships that do many things, like the Air Lee-Berg destroyers and the Ticonderoga cruisers. It has relatively little dedicated anti-ship weapons on board most ships. However, the thing is that the U.S. Navy uses something called an SM-2, which can basically be used to counter ships and to counter ships and to counter and use as an anti-ship weapon. Also, the PLA-N ships are much more focused on one or two areas, and also unlike the U.S. Navy. And also, most classes of ships of the U.S. Navy are much more technologically advantaged than the PLA-N, as demonstrated by the fact that a PLA-N commander said that in the year 2000 that his frigate was equivalent to a 1970s U.S. frigate. Also, the U.S. Navy is designed for a sequential attack. Now, my research method slide is unfortunately very math heavy, so it's going to look like a math lecture, but sorry. So I'm using a salvo combat model, which is developed by Wayne Hughes, to basically predict the results of a battle. And it basically goes like the change in fleet A, which in this case would be the United States Navy, is equal to the negative difference of the offensive power fleet B, which is the PLA-N, minus the defensive power fleet A, which would be the U.S. Navy, times the same power of each ship. Since pretty much every missile in each of the ships carried by in each of the ships of both navies are capable of destroying one ship or disabling a ship with a single hit, the same power is just one. So the fleet A comprises of 6 aircraft carriers, 42 destroyers, and 12 cruisers. as this is determined by the fact that former Secretary Leon Panetta actually said that there will be 60% of U.S. Navy stationed in the Pacific very soon. And then also the PLA-N is combining all three fleets of the PLA-N into one fleet. Since this would basically be a fleet, this would basically be all of the fleets in once because it is actually fighting the war off China's shores. So basically the Offensive Power Fleet B, which is the PLA-N, they have about 2,895 missiles that can be launched that can be used to destroy ships. They also have the ability to stop 1,037 anti-ship missiles. U.S. Navy has about 626 anti-ship missiles that are solely dedicated to anti-ship, and defensive power of 636 missiles to be downed. So also the U.S. Navy also has about 5,224 SM-2 missiles, which I said as again are dual use. There will also be 200 ASROCs and 200 SM-6s, but basically counter submarines and anti-ship ballistic missiles. Also, the U.S. does have the ISR advantage because of the fact that because shipborne radars on their destroyers can actually outrange all PLA-N missiles, and then in theory, and also all U.S. anti-ship missiles, they also actually outrange their U.S. Navy radars. So in theory, the U.S. should be able to launch a strike first, and whoever launches the first strike is usually the side that wins. The types of attacks that could basically be used, that would be potentially be used in the battle, would basically be the mass attacks, the sequential attacks, and the dispersed attacks. The mass attacks when all the missiles that one side has are fired at all at once, and all the missiles are fired from the same area in one group, as demonstrated by the graphic. Also, the U.S. has better ISR, so the U.S. would probably win. The dispersed attack would basically be when you had, which is basically when you have ships firing the missiles in different areas, as demonstrated by the graphic. This would probably be used by the PLA-N because of the fact that if they knock out all the ISR assets of the U.S. Navy, they basically be able to knock out. If they knock out all the ISR, they'd basically be able to have like a kind of. They'd basically be able to have the ability to basically not really be found on U.S. Navy radars, and this basically be used by the PLA-N. And what they do is they probably have their maybe 88 stealth missile boats in one group, and then the rest of the fleet would just be divided into other groups. The idea is basically to conduct a surprise attack on the U.S. Navy. The last type of attack that will be replicating is a sequential attack, which is when there's more than one attack by one side, not all at once. This would be won by the U.S. Navy due to superior ISR, and that graphic explains this sequential attack. So now onto the research methods. The mass attack would probably be used by a U.S. first strike because they have superior ISR, and they can actually superior ISR, and they can actually find the Chinese ships before the Chinese launch missiles at them. So basically, to save all the math, basically if there's a mass attack with the first strike by the U.S., the Chinese Navy ships would probably be sunk, all of them. The dispersed attack would basically be when a first strike would be launched by the PLA-N. And also to save you the math, about 400 and all the U.S. Navy ships would be sunk. And even if every SM-2 missile is used against the anti-ship missiles from the PLA-N, they would still be unable to be countered by the U.S. Navy. So there would be a significant amount of leakers. However, this is not likely once again due to the superiority of ISR. But if the PLA-N manages to pull off a surprise attack, it would be fatal for the U.S. Navy. So the idea of the sequential attack, which is the most likely attack which the U.S. Navy would like, but basically the U.S. Navy would spot the PLA-N before the PLA-N spots U.S. Navy, and then they basically goes to launch sequential attacks first with the F-18s, which would basically then they'd probably be attacked by the People's Liberation Army Navy aircraft because the F-18s would probably give away the ship's position. And the result of the attack by the PLA-N would be, by the PLA-N Air Force would be the U.S. to counter all of them. However, the U.S. Navy would probably then attack long-range anti-ship missiles, and all these would be countered. However, the real crux of the issue that would really destroy the U.S. Navy would basically be the fact that the PLA-N cannot handle 5,224 anti-ship missiles being flung at it. So the conclusion is that the U.S. would probably win a sea battle between the U.S. and the PRC. The U.S. has superior ISR capabilities, and even if American ISR assets are all taken out, the radars on the ships, basically the radar on U.S. ships would outrange all PLA-N SSMs, and anti-ship missiles in the U.S. Navy would outrange all PLA-N SSMs as well as U.S. radars. However, a surprise attack would be the only way to beat the U.S., as demonstrated by the dispersed attack earlier in this presentation. And given the fact that the SM-2s would probably win the battle, a loss of an aircraft carrier would be insignificant in an overall battle, but a propaganda coup for the PLA-N. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah?
Did you look at any historically similar situations in the past between two armies and navies?
Well, the thing about this case is that the last type of war they had, was there actually had anti-ship missiles being fired at each other, would actually be the Falklands War, and that was totally different. That's totally different from the type of war that would be fought between the U.S. Navy and the PLA-N. Next question.